Welcome to Murder Mile, a true crime podcast, an audio-guided walk featuring many of London's untold, unsolved and long-forgotten murders, all set within and beyond the West End. Today's episode is about a very ordinary bank robbery, as the overwhelming evidence pointed to the fact that John Esmond Murphy walked into a bank, bungled a heist, pulled a gun, shot and stabbed the manager dead, and was then captured, arrested, convicted, and executed. But did he actually do it? Murder Mile is researched using the original police files. It contains moments of satire, shock, and grisly details. And as a dramatization of the real events, it may also feature loud and realistic sounds, so that, no matter where you listen to this podcast, you'll feel like you're actually there. My name is Michael, I am your tour guide, and this is Murder Mile. Episode 101, The Fatal Seizure of John Esmond Murphy. Today, I'm standing on Shaftesbury Avenue off Chinatown, W1, one street north of the fiery death of Reginald Gordon West, one street west of the hushed-up shooting at the Rosendale Club, a few yards from the first failed assassination on Russian dissident Alexander Litvinenko, and one street south of the stabbing of Savas Dimitriadis and the Cypriot Code of Silence. Coming soon to Murder Mile. This bit of Shaftesbury Avenue lies on the border between Soho and Chinatown, only being little more than a busy road from Piccadilly Circus to Holborn. It is all of the traffic, but none of the footfall. With nothing to see here and nowhere to go, tourists pass through this West End wasteland, as it's a bit of a cultural dead zone, as there are no theatres, pubs, or sites of historical interest. Just two long lines of very grey, very vague buildings, and lots of exhaust fumes. And with the bustling theatres deliberately keeping their distance, it's as if this bit of Shaftesbury Avenue is an architectural leper. Of course, to anyone who loves staring blankly at some obscure arty subtitled twaddle, losing a shirt or a hand in a not-so-legal Chinese casino, wasting a night being yarred at in a pretentious club by some TV tossers, or overcharged by a Chinese herbalist for an extract of tiger anus to cure your piles, then this is your promised land. A high point is at 84 Shaftesbury Avenue, a 5-storey mansion block with red brick and cream-coloured pillars built in the late 1800s, which is now home to Olé, a Korean barbecue where many satisfied munchers, like myself, have gorged themselves silly on a wide array of mouth-watering delights. And although this is a fabulous place to fill your belly, it is also the site of a bungled robbery, an unfortunate death, and a very strange miscarriage of justice. As it was here, on Saturday the 7th of November 1908, that John Esmond Murphy would be fatally seized with an uncontrollable urge to steal and kill, for the very first and the very last time. But did he actually do it? Well, yes, he did. And the evidence is irrefutable. It's a fact that on Saturday the 7th of November 1908, at 11:40 a.m, 21-year-old John Esmond Murphy of Paddington, having purchased a 4-inch switchblade knife and a .455 caliber revolver just one day prior, entered the bank of Cartmell and Schlittle. Being penniless, he shot the manager once, stabbed him 6 times in the hands and chest. A struggle ensued, Murphy fled, and in his desperation to escape, he stabbed a van driver and a police constable, who wrestled him to the ground, and he was swiftly arrested within sight of the bank, and just a few seconds after the robbery. The incident occurred in broad daylight, on a busy street. He wasn't wearing a disguise, and he was positively identified, without hesitation, by several witnesses who all gave detailed statements. His fingerprints were found in the bank, on the gun, on the knife, and the blood had stained his clothes. 7 weeks later, being deemed medically fit to stand trial, although he pleaded his innocence by claiming that he had no memory of the event, with his insanity plea rejected and his laughable defense being down to a dose of malaria, 2 bouts of sunstroke, and a hereditary form of epilepsy. As the robbery was clearly premeditated, he was found guilty in a court of law and executed for his crimes. If ever there was an open and shut case of robbery and murder, it was this. But did he actually do it? Well, no, I don't think he did. John Esmond Murphy, known as Jack, was born in Calcutta, India, in the summer of 1886, as a second of 2 siblings to British parents. His mother was a housewife, his father was a sergeant major in the army, and he had 1 sister called Kathleen. Originating from Ireland, the Murphys were a loving but ordinary lower middle class family seeking a better life as the British Empire expanded across Asia. Being a sensitive little boy, with a small thin frame, brown wavy hair, and a beak-like nose, Jack was neat and clean, polite and calm, quiet and meek. He didn't shout, cry, or cause a disturbance. And being an intelligent lad with a love of engineering and poetry, he had a bright future ahead of him. But sadly, the Murphys were a family who were cursed with bad luck, illness, and tragedy. In 1896, when Jack was aged 10, the Murphy family was struck down with malaria, a deadly disease of the blood carried by mosquitoes, resulting in shivers, fever, and sometimes death. And although not a cure, a lifelong course of quinine would prove an effective treatment. But sadly, his father would not survive. As a small sickly boy, Jack would battle typhoid, scarlet fever, cholera, and severe bouts of sunstroke, which would almost take his life. And although he bravely soldiered on, his life was to get worse. In 1902, when Jack was aged 16, having contracted pleurisy, his mother died of a brain fever. Jack and Kathleen were 2 grieving teens, all alone in India and 4,000 miles from their nearest living relative. Anyone else would have struggled and failed, but being educated, hard-working, and fluent in Bengali, gifted a small inheritance in their parents' will, they would thrive for 2 more years. Only, both parents had bequeathed them something more than money and a home. As the biggest inheritance the 2 siblings would receive was the hereditary curse of epilepsy. Initially, Jack and Kathleen didn't know that they were epileptic, as with its onset often occurring in puberty, to the best of their knowledge they had never had a seizure. But then, there are 2 very distinct types of epileptic seizure, one which affects the whole body, and the other which affects the brain. Commonly known as grand mal seizures, these attacks have familiar symptoms, like the rigid stiffening of the body, a frothing at the mouth, a loss of bladder control, consciousness, and sometimes the ability to breathe, and most notably, the violent, uncontrollable spasm of the whole muscular system, which can last for seconds, take hours to recover, and may require medical assistance. And although both types are caused by a violent electrical disturbance in the brain, petit mal seizures are incredibly subtle. So subtle that sometimes even the sufferer and those around them are unaware that a seizure has taken place. Known as absent seizures, although symptoms vary, often being triggered by moments of emotional stress, an absent seizure is typically denoted by a vacant look in the eyes, a slight fluttering of the eyelids, a ceasing of a conversation mid-sentence, and being physically unarmed. They often return to normal with no memory of those missing seconds. But sometimes, an atypical petit mal seizure can be preceded by mood swings, aggression, and almost like Jekyll and Hyde, a severe but temporary shift in personality. And although, during a seizure, they can still walk, move, and interact with the world, unlike the people around them, they have no control over their actions. Thankfully, suffering intermittently from typical petit mal seizures, neither Jack nor Kathleen let their disabilities stop them from leading an active and productive life. In 1903, aged 17, Jack and Kathleen returned to the UK, first to Glasgow and then to London. Having served 18 months as a conscientious and dedicated private in the British Indian Army, being trained as a mechanic, Jack earned a good reputation as a reliable, trustworthy and hard-working engineer. In 1904, he trained as a driver and a mechanic for the automobile market on Oxford Street, where his manager praised him as an asset to the company and said that he was quite a gentleman. In 1905, he became substation attendant for the Underground Electric Railways Company, responsible for the power supply at Ravenscourt Park Tube Station, where his supervisor said that he was steady, reliable and intelligent. And remaining in employment until March 1908. As an assistant to a civil engineer, Jack was only laid off owing to an engineering strike, where his last employer hailed him as a very well-trained engineer, perfectly sober, and the meekest and quietest individual that I have ever met. Jack rarely drank, he didn't do drugs, he didn't lead a lavish lifestyle, and he had no expensive tastes. He never swore, shouted or stole. He didn't have a bad bone in his body, and he had no criminal record. And as a quiet lad with few friends, outside of engineering and poetry, his one passion was target practice. Once a week, having trained as a keen but careful marksman in the army, he enjoyed the thrill of shooting at paper targets at the King's Rifles shooting range in nearby Oxenden Street. Keen to develop a solid career, to live a good decent life, and to aid his sister who had been diagnosed with a brain tumour, Jack had never taken a day off sick. In fact, although an epileptic would never have been hired for such responsible roles, his petit mal seizures were so infrequent that his colleagues barely noticed. 6 months later, a court of law would conclusively prove that John Esmond Murphy had robbed a bank, inflicted 2 violent assaults, and had brutally murdered a man for money. But did he? It is often said that atypical seizures are often triggered by moments of great stress. By the middle of October 1908, having eked out a meagre existence in a series of part-time jobs, even though he had moved into a modest basement flat at 145 Shireland Road in Paddington, having pawned off his personal possessions, Jack couldn't afford to pay his 6 shillings a week rent, or even to eat. Having deliberately moved 1 street away to be near his only surviving relative, his beloved sister, 3 times a day Jack would visit Kathleen. Having married well, she lived in the pleasant mansion block called Delaware Mansions in Maida Vale. But living apart from her husband, and with a 3-year-old daughter, Kathleen required constant care as she awaited an operation on her brain tumour. burdened by no work, no money, and no purpose. With the threat of being homeless looming, no bright prospects on the horizon, and his last surviving family member knocking at death's door. Although Jack was still his usual self, a meek, placid, and thoughtful boy, all too often, a cloud would descend over his head as he morphed into someone else. Someone darker, more depressive, and unusually angry. Over the weeks, as his frequent seizures grew stronger and longer, his eyes became cold and dead, his face became vague and distant, and his eyelids fluttered almost imperceptibly, as if he was on autopilot. And yet, now there were new symptoms, as sometimes he would scratch his left wrist until the red raw rash was bleeding. Often he'd rock back and forth on his feet, muttering in an incoherent mumble, as waves of epileptic attacks came one after the other. And then there were his dark and violent moods. In an instant, having been the epitome of meekness and compassion, who just seconds earlier had been supping his tea whilst reading poetry to soothe his sister, Jack would suddenly snap and change into someone unrecognizable, who was aggressive, violent, and threatening. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it would end. He would return to his normal self, unaware that time had passed, that an incident had occurred, and unable to apologize for his actions, as he had no idea what he had done. As the rapidity of his petit mal seizures escalated, as Jack became physically and emotionally drained by the persistent electrical assaults on his brain, it became more impossible to work out where the old Jack ended and the new Jack began. And yet, just 2 weeks before the robbery and the murder of a man who Jack had never met, something very sinister and out of character would happen. On Monday the 19th of October 1908, at 12:45 a.m, Kathleen and her live-in carer called Stella Lynn had been out of Rayner's bar in Haymarket and had returned by taxi to Delaware Mansions. Just as they had left it a few hours earlier, the door was locked, the fire was out, the lights were off, and the flat was empty. Or so they thought. Having heard an odd noise, a creaking, then a breathing, as if inside Kathleen's bedroom was someone waiting. Opening the door, they saw no one, but the sounds didn't cease. And with no stranger hidden behind the door or inside the wardrobe, there was only one last place to check: underneath the bed. Striking a match, as Stella peered into the dark recess beneath, with his beak-like nose touching the bed springs, Stella saw Jack. He was semi-clad, motionless, and grinding his teeth. He was almost catatonic, as if he was asleep, but with his open eyes fluttering, and tightly gripped in his right hand was a cutthroat razor. Stella was rightly terrified, as barely a few days earlier, while sharing a cab into the West End with Jack, as another black mood descended, he had muttered, "I'm sick of this world. I'm going to find my sister and end her life, and mine, and her child's." He didn't. In fact, seconds later, he was fine, and had forgotten everything he had just said. But Stella had forewarned Kathleen of this threat. That night, as Stella snatched away the razor, in an instant, Jack snapped out of his strange slumber, wrapped both of his bloodied hands around his sister's throat, and as Kathleen screamed in terror, he strangled her. His mouth wide and silent, his eyes vacant and dead, as if it meant nothing. Kathleen's death was only stopped by Stella, and as swiftly as this attempted murder began, it had stopped. The incident was reported to the police, 2 constables, P.C. Sanders and Hammond, attended the scene, and a statement was made. But as Kathleen did not wish to press charges, and Jack was now calm and unthreatening, the matter was dropped. For the next 3 days, although Kathleen's throat was bruised and she couldn't swallow, he refused to apologize, as in his eyes, nothing had happened. This incident only formed a small part of Jack's defense, as it was deemed irrelevant. But according to the prosecution, what happened next would clearly constitute premeditation of the robbery. On Friday the 6th of November 1908, at 9 a.m, Jack reassured his landlady that he would pay his outstanding rent the very next day. Only he had no money and no job. At 2 p.m, having loaned £4 off his sister to pay his back rent, instead he went to the King's Rifle gun range on Oxenden Street and brought a .455 caliber Webley Fosbury revolver, 25 bullets, and a black-handled 4-inch switchblade knife. At 8 p.m, as he sat with Kathleen, took her temperature and read her some Indian poetry to soothe her, as although the operation to remove her brain tumour was due the next day, being 5 guineas short of the full fee, her treatment looked unlikely. At 10:30 p.m, as she slept, he kissed her goodnight and reassured her that everything would be okay. But that night, the cancer almost took her. The next day, for the first time ever, this timid boy would rob a bank and commit a brutal murder. But was Jack acting out of desperation in a moment of high emotional stress? Or as a petit mal epileptic? Was he caught in the grip of an absent seizure? At 84 Shaftesbury Avenue, on the corner of Macclesfield Street in Chinatown, was Cartmell and Schlittle. A bank and foreign currency exchange ran for 15 years by George Cartmell and Frederick Schlittle. Being barely 12 feet square, it was small and practical, but undeniably a bureau de change, as with large black lettering stating this above, although impossible to see inside owing to its lightly frosted glass on both sides. In the windows, behind a locked screen, sat 13 bowls of foreign notes and gold coins. Inside, through a thin wooden door, in an even smaller foyer, was a large wooden counter with a heavy brass grill above, which kept the staff, the customers, and the money at a distance. Across the counter was a neat array of bankers' books, paper bags, weights and scales, a check perforator, and a till. Behind the counter were rows of currency drawers and 2 safes. In total, the bank held almost £2,000 in coins, notes, and gold. Roughly £250,000 today. With co-owner George Cartmell being on leave, and the manager George Calderwood heading out, the bank was left in the very capable hands of his partner, 47-year-old Frederick Schlittle, a married father of 2. Witnessed on the corner of Dean Street, dressed in a plain brown suit and a dark overcoat, but nothing to disguise his face, not a mask nor a hat. Jack stood silently, rocking on his heels, as a trickle of blood ran freely down the red rash on his left wrist. But when later questioned, Jack could recall none of this. At 11:40 a.m, as Benjamin Goodkin, the bank's last customer, exited the door, being unfazed by any sight or sound, as if in a trance, Jack calmly crossed the busy street, a loaded gun by his side, and entered Cartmell and Schlittle, a place he had never been to before, nor had any reason to visit. The robbery was unlike any other, as with the gun outstretched, and poking through the brass grille at the chest of Frederick Schlitt. Jack never once shouted, "Hands up, this is a robbery," or "Give me your money." He didn't utter a single warning or instruction. Instead, with wide fluttering eyes, he fired. This sweet-natured and sensitive boy, who had never fired a single bullet in his life at anything but a paper target, had, without provocation, emotion, words or sounds, shot Frederick above the heart. And having fallen to the floor, as the bespectacled banker tried to defend himself with the hefty bulk of the check perforator, Jack, who had no history of violence or sadism, pulled out a black-handled switchblade knife and plunged the 4 inches of steel into his chest, slashing at the terrified man's hands. As the blade perforated his stomach, his bowel, his intestines, his shoulder, and his left lung. And although Jack's teeth were bared, he didn't seem to be grinning with glee, but grinding his teeth. Desperate to raise an alarm, as the pale boy with a vacant expression plunged a knife deep into his torso. Having grabbed a brass weight, with all of his might, Frederick hurled the half-kilo lump, and having smashed the lock screen and the frosted front window, it landed with a thump on Shaftesbury Avenue, scattering shattered glass and almost hitting Benjamin Goodwin, who turned back as he'd forgotten something. Seeing Frederick in an ever-increasing crimson pool of blood, Benjamin screamed, "Police! Murder!" alerting a constable. But the second he looked back, Jack had fled. And although the floor was strewn with almost £200 worth of paper money and gold coins, Jack didn't steal a single penny. Instead, he fled down Shaftesbury Avenue towards Piccadilly Circus, and at the corner of Wardour Street, being confronted, he stabbed the van driver George Carter and police constable Albert Howe. But having his short pursuit cut short by several passers-by, Jack was swiftly arrested, just yards and seconds after the robbery. In his cell, this small meek boy didn't seem like a robber or a knife-wielding maniac. But as the witnesses had all seen it unfold with their own eyes, there was no denying that he was. The arresting constable even commented that he looked perfectly cool and calm, as if he had been out for a walk. And yet, when questioned, this placid young man just looked confused and bemused, as he had no memory of the incident whatsoever. 2 days later, Frederick Schlitt died of his injuries, and Jack was charged with murder. The investigation was simple. Conducted by Inspector Fogwell, the robbery was conclusively proven to have been premeditated, as Jack had purchased both weapons the day before. His motivation was money for his rent and his sister's operation. And although there was an abundance of irrefutable evidence to prosecute Jack, such as the gun, the knife, the fingerprints, and multiple eyewitness statements from P.C. Howe, George Carter, and before his death, Frederick Schlitt, there was very little evidence to defend him. Having apologized for his actions, although many colleagues testified to his placid character, they all admitted that he had unusual quirks, tics, and in recent weeks, that he was prone to unnatural, violent outbursts. With an insanity plea dismissed, on the 8th of December 1908, at the Old Bailey, the medical experts, none of whom had any direct experience of absent seizures or petit mal epilepsy, all dismissed his claims. Dr. Philip Dunn, the police divisional surgeon, stated, "In my opinion, his condition was perfectly consistent with nervousness arising from the situation." Dr. James Scott, medical officer at Brixton Prison, said, "He was conscious of his acts, and he knew whether he was doing right or wrong." And with the judge deeming his sister's deposition into his mental and physical health inadmissible as evidence, having pleaded not guilty to all charges, a unanimous jury found him guilty of murder. And on the 6th of January 1909, Jack Esmond Murphy was executed at Pentonville Prison for a crime which the evidence proved that he did commit. But did he? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to Murder Mile. After the break, I go blah blah blah, slurp slurp slurp, munch munch munch, and then we all switch off, if you haven't already. Before that, big thank you to my new Patreon supporters, who are Christine Glasson and Beverly Cadell. I thank you. With a special thank you to Damien Twarogowski for your very kind donation. I thank you too. Plus everyone who has recently left a lovely review of Murder Mile on your favourite podcast app. It is truly appreciated. Murder Mile was researched, written and performed by myself, with the main musical themes written and performed by Eric Stein and John Books of Cult With No Name. Thank you for listening, and sleep well. Oh dear. Hello everyone. Welcome to Extra Mile. Hey. It's me. Sorry, tired early. It's gloomy outside today, so do you know it had the big light shining in earlier on. It was too bright, and now all of a sudden it's all gloomy and crappy, and which is good in a way. It's quite good when it's weird when the sun's up and bright, and in the morning all the birds are chirping and going, and it's hard to record stuff. When it's gloomy, the birds can't be bothered, so it makes it slightly easier. So cool. Anyway, Extra Miles here, the extra part of the show. You've listened to the episode, that's that done. This is the extra bit. Not compulsory. You don't have to listen to it if you don't want to. Some people do. That's why I do this. But the episode is done, so you can switch off now if you want to. But what we'll do a quiz very shortly, and you'll learn some extra stuff about this case as well. So, how long have I done? Okay, good. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Where am I at the moment? I'm still in the same place that I was last week. I'm going to move next week. It's all right here. It's nice and peaceful. I'm near stuff, but not near enough. Nice places to work. The only problem is there's a bit of a whiff. There's a poo plant around the corner, not too far away, and yeah, it's on the hot days you can smell the poo wafting around. It's quite funny. You go to the top of the hill and people are there with their big posh houses and their big gates and their posh cars, and you go, oh, this is very nice, and then the smell of poo creeps over, and you go, ah, yes. I had that years ago when my boss had bought a new house. It's a very, very expensive house in a very expensive part of town, and she showed me around. It was very pricey, a good couple of £1 million on this. We were in the back garden. I went, oh, you're on the Heathrow flight path as well, and she went, ugh. It's like, yeah, she spent all this money, but you can't control where the planes are flying over, and they were flying over really low. Anyway, so that's that. What's going on this week? Today's Thursday. You've just got episode 100. I'm doing episode 101 this morning. I'm trying to stay on target. I'm going to pick up the Murder Mile key rings this week, which are hopefully turning up. So £25 $25 patrons will be getting one of those gratis. I will give a few of them out to the £10 patrons, and I might quiz off a few of them as well, but they're rare. I've only got about 100 of them, so they will be special gifts. Going to pick those up as well, and that means a quick trip into town. I'm going to put my tea on now while we're thinking about it and open some windows. Quick trip into town. I'm going to get my post because I'm about 30 miles away from my post box. So, Yeah, it's a bit of a trek. It's like to go into town to get stuff. It's about 4 hours round trip because I don't have a car. And either I cycle in, or I have to get a series of buses and tubes, and I don't want to do that. But then I need to pick up my post and go into town and get stuff. Tea's on. Right, tea's on. Good. Open some windows. Get some air in. Cool, lummy. That's better. I'm off to do my laundry in a bit because it's laundry day today. So I've taken all my bed sheets and all that to the laundrette. Oh, that's going to be fun. God, my life's exciting. What else has happened recently? I had a Costa coffee. It wasn't open, but they were doing takeaway. I had a Costa coffee. I haven't had one of those since early March. That was exciting. Ooh, all the things you miss. That's very exciting. Of course, I'm looking forward to the days when people stop being bellends and going to beaches and stuff like that, and people start wearing masks properly and stop being dickheads and going, no, I don't need to wear a mask. You do. Put a fucking mask on. Sooner you put on a mask and wash your hands and keep your distance, the sooner we can all get through this. But it's being delayed by bellends who think that they don't need to abide by the rules. It's starting to piss me off now, these people who think that they know better. Right. Anyway, I'm looking forward to the days when I can go back in Costa and abuse their internet and their electricity. I'm getting through a lot of fuel making all these episodes. Anyway, what else am I doing? Not much. Oh, I watched an old episode of Bake Off the other day. That was exciting. They were making Bakewell tarts. Yummy, that was good. What else is going on? As just mentioned, going off to do laundrette very shortly. I've been in a place where there's no laundrettes for the last couple of weeks, so I've been doing a lot of hand washing, but I found a laundrette nearby, except this is the weird thing, isn't it? Because I haven't touched any money since like the start of March. Been trying to do it all on contactless, which is good. I haven't had any. Normally I have a stash of pound coins and 10s and 20s. I got my 10s, I got my 20s and my 50s, but I realised I got no pound coins. So I literally had to go searching for pounds. And I was like, where do you buy pounds? Luckily the post office did them, so I've got some from the post office. But it was weird to hold. They're in a little sealed bag, which I like, and I'm going to put my gloves on before I touch them. I might disinfect them later on. But it was weird touching money again. Just not used to touching money anymore. Could this be the end of money? Could be. Anyway, what else happened the other day? I had my first trip to a pub. Obviously, pubs are open now. I met up with some friends. We did a nice social distance thing in the flat. We had a meal. We kept our distance. Then about 8 o'clock, we ran out of beers and we went, one of the mates was like, let's go to the pub. And we were like, well, there's a pub around the corner. It's open. It's meant to be socially distanced. Let's play it safe. So we walked in and they take your name. We were like, okay, we're happy with this. They take your name and they're like, right, we'll show you to a table. They showed us to a table and we're like, okay, this is good. Tables are all spaced apart and on the floor was all the lines telling you where to walk and where don't to walk. And you don't go to the bar, you sit at the table, you download an app, you order your drinks through the app and then you pay contactless. And I was like, okay, this is good. I'm quite liking this. But even though the pub wasn't busy, it was a big pub and there was probably only 30 people in there, none of the windows were open. Ooh, would have liked windows open, get a bit of air flowing through, air circulating. No one inside was wearing masks. No one inside, except us, were using hand sanitizer. I had mine in the middle of the table and we all had that. No one was wearing gloves. And it's true what they're saying. Drunk people can't socially distance at all. They just, you have some drink, the inhibitions go. They don't care anymore. And people were staggering around, coming over to the table, chatting to us, going, oh, mate, it's nice to be out in the pub, isn't it? Oh, I miss being in the pub, talking to people in their faces. It's like, mate, fuck off. Sorry about bad words then, but it was like we don't want you near us. And then they go, whoa, what's your problem? Why don't you want to talk to people? It's like, we don't know who you are. We don't know what germs you've got. It's weird, isn't it? It's weird that theatres, you can't open theatres yet, but if you think about it, the kind of people who go to the theatres, they don't tend to get drunk. They sit there quietly. You can socially distance and they stay where they are. You can watch the show. You can open the doors. You can put on the air conditioning. You can make it safe. But theatres aren't allowed to open and probably won't open for another year. And yet pubs are open. And it doesn't make sense because people, they have one drink and they don't follow the rules. It does not make sense. Weird, isn't it? Cinemas will be the same. Do you know, there's a way to make that work. Do you know? Because you have people who aren't drinking, they're just having some sugar. But they've opened the pubs, but not the theatre. If it was me, I would find a way to open theatres and cinemas and kept the pubs shut, or kept the pubs as a kind of a takeaway service. Finding a way to make it work. Coffee shops as well. We got new rules here at the moment. There's weird rules that say you have to wear masks when you go shopping, yeah? But you don't have to wear masks when you're in an office. Which is weird, isn't it? You kind of, I'm waiting for my kettle to boil. You can sit there in your office all day, surrounded by people with no windows open, breathing in their fumes all day. But if at lunchtime you decide you want to go out to Pret or Mackie Do's to get yourself something to eat, you have to put on a mask. But if you go to a pub, you don't. Weird, isn't it? There's no consistency. We're not going to get through this. It's not going well. It's not going well at all. Anyway, I'm staying in lockdown. I know some people have messaged me about our tours happening because, you know, everyone seems to think that the virus has gone and lockdown has stopped. No. I'm hoping to be up and running by September, October, but it all depends about whether we have a second wave, and it all depends about whether people are adhering to the rules. My tea's almost done. Oh. I put too much water in. And now it's overflowing. Woo! There we go. You can't beat a cup of tea. Cup of tea. Lovely. Lovely jubbly. If only all this virus stuff would be sorted by just a cup of tea. That'd be lovely. Lovely jubbly. Oh, hot, hot, hot. Oh, wow. I need to find some kind of spoon that doesn't get bloody hot when you're stirring your tea. Right, let's do some questions, peeps. Let's do some quests. Right, as mentioned, these will be questions associated with the episode. I might edit them out. I might edit the sequence, the part it's related to out of this episode. That might go. So if I ask you a question and you go, oh, I don't know anything about that, it's probably because I edited it out. Or I might mess it up when we go into the next bit, all the information. So let's do that now. Right, hokey cokey, pig in a pokey. Question 1. What city were Jack and Kathleen raised in? What city were Jack and Kathleen raised in? I almost gave away the answer. I'm too tired. Question 2. What type of epilepsy did Jack suffer from? Question 3. What did Jack's father do as a job? Some of these are easy questions. Some of them are hard questions. Question 4. What is at 84 Shaftesbury Avenue today? You would have heard that at the very start. Question 5. What was Jack holding when Stella found him under his sister's bed? Question 6. Which tube station was Jack the substation attendant for? Question 7. How much money was held at Cartmell and Schlitt's bank? I've put 2 versions in there. So one is how much it was worth in 1908 and how much it was worth today. You can do either. Question 9. What were Jack's 3 favourite hobbies and interests? They were all in this episode. Question 9. What is the name of the shooting range Jack went to? There you go, that's in there. And question 10. Before Jack and Kathleen came to London, where did they live? So that's after they left. I'm going to ruin the first question, aren't I? Well, the first question was what city were they raised in, so it makes no difference. So after they left India, before Jack and Kathleen came to London, where did they live first? Okay. Let's have a look at some stuff here. Okay. Let's start. Okay. Obviously, the day of the attack itself, the murder and the robbery. Obviously, there's a lot of high stress in the house because his sister was going off for her operation. I'll discuss more about that shortly. People said that he was in a weird mood. He was oddly distracted. he'd spent a lot of days. It didn't seem to be making a lot of sense to people. Like whenever he was talking, nothing seemed to make sense. Obviously, Kathleen lived with her daughter. She had a 3-year-old daughter, also called Kathleen. What was he? Where was this bit? Sorry, I'm going through. I'm going through all my notes at the time. I'm trying to work out what's good and what's interesting. Yeah, as mentioned, they'd been up all night because they really thought that his sister wasn't going to make it through the night. She was really struggling. The doctor had been called out a couple of times. His name was Dr. John Lancelot Atkinson. He attended to Mrs. Carlton for the couple of days prior to her operation. Said she was very ill indeed, that they almost lost her that night. She'd been suffering from a brain tumour. She was meant to have an operation. So that day, the day of the murder and the robbery, as mentioned, she needed to have an extra 5 guineas for the surgeon's service. Don't forget, this is prior to the National Health Service. So this is 1908. This is like 30 years before the National Health Service. So prior to that, you had to pay. I know this is baffling to hear, isn't it? You had to pay for all your medical treatment. So any prescriptions, any visits to the doctor, any operations, you had to pay for all that. I know it's baffling, isn't it? Sorry, Americans. How can anyone live in a world where you have to, look, thank God we live in a world where, if we want an operation, we can just go and have it today. Go, can I have an operation? Yep, thank you very much, it's free. If you get knocked down by a car, it's all dealt with. Everything's covered. But back then, it was, if you hadn't got any money, you were screwed. So, she was 5 guineas short for a life-saving operation. Jack didn't know this, but she was actually going to buy. She'd loaned him £4, which he'd spent on a gun. So she was a bit short. She was actually going to borrow the money off her solicitor, a guy called Mr. Ellis. But actually that day, the surgeon actually took pity on her and decided that he didn't want any operation for the surgery. So no fee was actually paid. So actually, if Jack wasn't in a seizure and he was committing the robbery, for money for his sister, it was kind of irrelevant in another way because, she didn't need the money. She was going to be okay. As mentioned, I got a little bit of a description of the bank, which was there, only a little tiny place. The shop was flush with the pavement on the right-hand side going north, so kind of the entrance was more on Macclesfield Street as opposed to Shaftesbury Avenue. So it's a corner shop, but there was windows on both sides. It had lettering above saying Bureau de Change. It's only small, as you'd expect, as we have with kind of those foreign exchange counters today. You walk in, there's not much there. There's a big, thick counter in front of you with a grill that you can't get behind. People sit behind there, and then they slide your money through a little drawer or a slot. Interestingly, there was the side door on here, which gave you access to where the staff were, was never locked. They never really had any problems with this at all. So their side door, it wasn't locked. It was kind of on a latch. So there's no real discussion of how Frederick Schlitt and Jack ended up wrestling and fighting together. It's believed that Frederick kind of went to run, and either he came out into the front with the check perforator to attack Jack to defend himself, or Jack went behind and dragged him into the foyer, which doesn't make sense. But obviously, Frederick never mentioned that in his statement, and Jack was in the middle of a fit, so we don't know. It seems strange that Jack didn't kind of take... I was almost about to mess up one of the questions then. I won't. There was a lot of money in the shop, as mentioned. As mentioned, there was lots of foreign exchange money, lots of gold. I can mention stuff that won't ruin the question here. I think they said that there was around 30 to 40 pounds worth of gold in the front of the shop behind the locked screen, but the screen had been smashed. So, 30, 40 pounds, that's a lot of money. So I had some really nice details about. This was the guy. I researched into Frederick's life to see whether I take it his perspective, but actually, when I learnt more about the seizures that Jack had almost messed up another question. I felt it better to focus on Jack as opposed to the guy who was the actual victim. So his full name was Friedrich George Wilhelm Maria Julius Schlitt. That's a name and a half. But everyone called him Julius. He was born in 1861, originally came from Germany. He was married to Nellie. She was 4 years younger than him. They had one son called Ronald and one daughter called Ethel. They lived in La Rose Road in Kensington upon Thames, very nice part of town. They had a servant. They were married. He'd been a banker for many years. He was 47 years old. He wore spectacles, a broad-shouldered man of about 6'2". And George Thomas Cartmell was his business partner. Business partner. But that week he was on holiday. Tea time. He was very regular, a good man. Came in 9 a.m. till 6:30 p.m. Saturdays he worked till 3:30. Everything was very much regular and above board. As mentioned, the last customer who came out of the shop was Benjamin Allison Goodkin. It's weird. We've got a gentleman whose middle name is Maria, and now we have a gentleman whose middle name is Allison. Interesting. Okay. He was the last man to come out of the shop, the last man to kind of witness everything going on. He said that was around 11:40 a.m. He was the manager of the Earl's Court roller skating rink. He'd just gone in there to check a directory. He came out, then he realised something and he turned back. And at the point that he turned back to go back to the shop, that's when the big weight came through the shop and smashed the window. Friedrich Schlitt and George Cartmell, the owners of the shop, had already agreed with them that if there was going to be a robbery, there's no discussion that they'd had a robbery before, but they'd said, because there was no alarm system in the shop. Don't forget, this is 1908. What they said was, if ever they were going to be robbed, they would grab one of the heavy weights and hurl it through the street side window so it causes a disturbance, and therefore you can shout, "Help police," which is what happened. As mentioned, it seems kind of weird that Jack didn't actually say anything when he went into the shop. He just walked in, gun aimed, fired the gun at him. Didn't say hands up, didn't say robbery, didn't say give me your money. None of that happened. Thankfully, Friedrich Schlitt was alive for about 2 days. He was in hospital. He was able to give quite a few statements. As mentioned, he picked up the heavy Czech perforator to defend himself. Unfortunately, you've got even though Jack is shorter than him, he's meant to be around 5 inches shorter than him. He was on top of him, a lot smaller, but was stabbing him with a knife. So he was trying to defend himself with the Czech perforator. As mentioned, he had multiple stab wounds, especially to his right hand. There was a clean cut at the base of the little finger and across to the palm on the other side, and one end exposing the tendon. On the left hand, there was a similar cut on the palm, but not so deep. So he had his hands up and was using his hands to defend himself. As mentioned, he had stab wounds to the intestine, the stomach, the left shoulder, but the main one, he had a stab wound just above the heart, which was lucky, but unfortunately, the main one was to his left lung, which is why he survived for about 2 days. Unfortunately, he went to hospital and they said he died of blood loss and shock. What else is there? Obviously Benjamin saw this. Benjamin Gukin. He heard the glass break. The weight landed in front of him, showered him in glass. He looked inside. He saw that there was a robbery going on. Well, actually, he said he saw that there seemed to be wrestling going on, and then he looked and he could see the knife coming down. So he screamed, "Murder, police!" This seems to be a thing in that era. A lot of these stories are people screaming, "Murder, police!" I've never heard anyone in the last 50 years screaming, "Murder, police!" What else have we got? There's a guy. Another witness was Oscar Miller. He was a tailor based next door. He heard the sound of the glass breaking. He came out as well, so he witnessed all that was going on. George Thomas Carter was the van driver. He was driving along Shaftesbury Avenue towards Piccadilly Circus. He heard a crash of broken glass about 18 yards off his left. He heard the cries of "police" and "murder, help," which was from Benjamin. He said, I called Police Constable Howe, who was on the corner of Wardour Street. I jumped off my van and ran towards the prisoner, who came out of the shop and ran towards me, holding the fronts of his overcoat up. As I barred his way, he put out his right hand into his overcoat, took something out, and made a blow at my left chest. I felt a sharp sensation in the hand and a numbness at the shoulder. I called out to the police constable, "Look out, he's got a knife." When I got to him, he said, "I know, I've got it." That's the policeman who said that, and pointed to his left shoulder. The policeman had been stabbed by that point as well. That's not funny. The police constable was PC Albert Allen Howe, a Metropolitan Police Constable. He was on duty on the corner of Wardour Street near the obelisk. The obelisk doesn't exist there anymore. I believe it has been moved. He said at 11:45 I heard shouts. I went to 84. He went towards 84 Shaftesbury Avenue and saw the prisoner pursued by Carter, who shouted, "Stop him." I closed with the prisoner, who held up his arm. I dodged under his arm, and he wounded me under the right shoulder in the bend of my arm. I held the prisoner's coat, threw down the knife, which appeared in court. When I picked it up, I ran after him. Carter came up and said he stabbed me. I found blood coming from my shoulder. By that point, other men had kind of joined in to help. There were several men who were helping the policeman. Arrest this man. One was George Walter Armitt, another cab driver. There's a cab rank just by there, so there's a lot of cab drivers. What else did he say? Yeah, they all joined in to arrest him. The knife fell from the prisoner's hand, and 3 or 4 of us encircled the prisoner, who was taken off. It was at that point, as mentioned, that Jack became really calm. He said, "I will go quietly with you, Constable." Constable said he was very cool. On the way to station, the policeman felt faint. He was relieved by Police Constable Gower. He was taken in a taxi to Vine Street Police Station, unfortunately no longer there anymore, but that's just at the back of Piccadilly Circus. And he said, when I overtook the prisoner, he was perfectly cool and calm, as if he'd been out for a walk, but he had no recollection of anything that had gone on that day. In fact, all Jack could say, he said he remembers the sound of a gun, but that's all he could remember. There's quite a lot of talk in if you look in a lot of the crappy tabloid newspapers and stuff like that, there's a lot of talk about the fact that he used aliases. John didn't. They go, "Oh, he used 4 or 5 aliases." It's not aliases. It's basically he's often in a state of confusion after he's had kind of his episodes, his attacks. So he gives names like John MacDonald, which near his name, but it's slightly confusing. He's John Esmond Murphy, but sometimes he uses John MacDonald. Sometimes he uses Jack, which is another name for John. So yeah, they're not really aliases. I think they're just really more of a state of confusion with him. They said that when he was at the police station, he was very calm. He seemed quite confused about what was going on. He didn't really know why he was there. He seemed to be quite distant. And when he was taken to the police cells, he called out to the inspector, "Inspector, you might let me know how the persons I injured are progressing." See, it doesn't make sense, does it? That anyone who would be that violent, I'm going into a bank, I'm going to rob a bank, I'm going to stab a man to death and shoot him and then stab 2 other people. Why would you go to a police station and be, concerned about the people that you've just attacked? George Calderwood, who was the manager of Cartmell and Schlittle, he returned about 12:15. I didn't put this in the story, but he said there was a crowd outside, and on entering the shop, I found Mr. Schlitt, he calls him Frederick Schlitt, sitting on the chair on the public side of the counter in a very serious state with his hands bleeding. The small door was open, the place disordered, paper bags scattered on the floor, the perforator had been moved, the check perforator, and everything was stained with blood, and there was blood upon the door. Mr. Schlitt's spectacles were on the floor, several of the brass weights were missing, and there was a hole through the window. Spots of blood were all over the floor, to within a yard of the window. And just a very small and noisy aircraft. A couple of miles away is a private airfield. There's lots of tossers flying in. Lots of people who seem to be able to fly in from other countries and aren't being quarantined. Interesting. Anyway, underneath the counter, he said the revolver was found. So one shot had been fired. There was still 5 in there. And yeah, it was weird. No money had been taken. I'm not going to mention about the money, but yeah, it says here between £30 to £40 worth in gold. So what's that? You have to times that by 100. So yeah, a good couple of £1,000 worth of gold just sitting there, which would have really have helped him out, but he didn't. Obviously, at the hospital, the clerk of Bow Street Police Court said that Frederick had made 2 statements, but unfortunately on Monday the 9th of November 1908 at 5:30 a.m, 2 days later, Frederick Schlitt died of his injuries. He was taken to Charing Cross Hospital, which is not too far away. As agreed, post-mortem said that he died of shock and hemorrhage resulting from his injuries. What else we got? They checked Jack's pockets. All he got in his pocket was a pawn ticket for 2 shops. So he'd pawned off some stuff. He'd got the thermometer he'd used on his sister the night before and the bottle of quinine. He got no money. He couldn't remember anything. At the trial, obviously, they brought in the medical experts. I've had to shorten it down for this, but Jack was observed by Philip Dunn, the divisional surgeon at Vine Street District for the police. So he was examined. What's the timing on this? This is like 4 hours later, and said his temperature was quite normal. Well, of course it was. 4 hours later. I found him to be perfectly rational in his answers to the questions I asked. He was shivering lightly, and his pulse was rapid at about 120. He answered my questions perfectly intelligent at once. I found no symptom of epilepsy. Well, of course, because he's looking for grandma. I think I might have buggered up the other one. Fuck it. I'm going to say it so we can just get through this bit. This is important. So obviously the doctor's looking for the main kind of epilepsy that we all expect, not the kind of more rarer type that Jack has. I have heard the evidence with regard to epilepsy. After an attack, the person is certain to be drowsy, heavy, and not at all clear. That condition would ordinarily continue for over 3 hours. If you look at this evidence here, you can clearly see that Philip Dunn, the divisional surgeon, is talking about grand mal seizures, not the type that Jack has. He's saying that ordinarily a person after an attack would be drowsy for 3 to 4 hours afterwards. Not true. They all agreed, all the doctors who came in agreed, because if you look in the press, unfortunately the press has always twisted the information, and what they say is, there's this guy and he blames the fact that he committed murder and a robbery on the fact that he had sunstroke and malaria once. And that's not true. What they're actually saying, if the press deliberately mess this around just to make a better story for themselves, but if you actually look at it, what the medical experts are saying is, because when he was young he had sunstroke and he had malaria, he also had possibly typhoid and cholera at an early age. What they mean is they're saying that his immune system is a hell of a lot weaker, so as he had some kind of epilepsy, this would have been exacerbated by that anyway, so it actually reduced his health and his ability to recover. So the likelihood is that he probably would have had more attacks, and they probably would have lasted longer than most others. Philip Dunn, the divisional surgeon, said, having heard the circumstances of the case, if these acts had been done by a prisoner in the course of an attack of seizure, it must have been one of the greatest violence. As in greatest violence of seizure. it is invariable that attacks of the greatest violence leave the longest traces behind. I did not find the slightest trace in the prisoner of ague. That's the kind of the word that they used for it back then. The condition was perfectly consistent with nervousness arising from the situation. So throughout all that, you can see that Philip Dunn, even though he's a doctor, clearly doesn't know the difference between grand mal seizures and the other one that we're talking about. They saw that he had scratches to the left of his wrist. He'd actually there was a chunk of flesh missing off the inside of his finger of his index finger on his left hand. They mentioned that they saw that he'd been obviously grinding his teeth recently. That didn't come up either. There was another doctor there, Adolphus Edward Bridges of Portland Place. He was a medical physician. Obviously, they didn't call in any epilepsy experts. He agreed that sunstroke and malaria would have aggravated his condition years earlier. He said, "Where's this important bit? I found another bit because here it is." He says, "See, none of them had any experience really of epilepsy, especially this type of epilepsy, or this type of epilepsy resulting in some kind of violence, but." During this doctor, Dr. Adolphus Bridges, when he's talking, he said, there is a case that Professor Simpson of Edinburgh told me about the following day. I have not known in my personal experience of a case of where the preparation leading up to the perpetration of this kind of violence was committed during the attack, but he said that he'd heard of one in Edinburgh recently. Interestingly, they didn't call Professor Simpson of Edinburgh to come and discuss that. They left it to this guy who was local, who had no experience. So there we go. James Scott was the medical officer for Brixton Prison. Obviously, he had to examine Jack in regards to his insanity plea. This happens a lot in that era. He said, I examined him. He examined him like 7 days later. He talked rationally and connectedly. His memory was fairly good. I detected no delusions. I have seen nothing resembling an attack of ague, that's epilepsy. He slept and ate fairly well as a rule. His conduct generally has been quiet and well conducted, which is him at his normal self. At times he looked rather depressed, which he was, because he's unemployed and his sister was unwell, and he just bloody committed murder. I have not detected any insanity. In my opinion, on the 7th of November, he was conscious of his acts and in a condition to know whether he was right or wrong. So unfortunately that went all the way through. 8th of December 1908, before Justice Rentoul, Jack was charged with the willful murder of Frederick Schlitt, feloniously wounding George Carter, who was the driver, with the intent to do him grievous bodily harm. Same for Albert Howe, the policeman, with the intent to resist the lawful apprehension of himself. And he was charged with, obviously, the murder of Frederick Schlitt. What else we got? Yeah, do you know, interestingly, Mr. Justice Pickford said, it is the safer course to admit it, meaning the deposition of Jack's sister Kathleen into his mental health, and I shall caution the jury as to those points on which they ought not to rely. So basically he says, even though we've got an expert, not an expert, but someone who knows about his personality and what he's normally like and what he's like when there's an attack going on, I'll decide which beats you should decide on. So I think unfortunately with this trial they'd already decided that it was a robbery and a murder, and that it was not petty mal. Bugger, I'm just giving away the question. Bollocks. So close to the end there. Right, we almost did it. He was executed on the 6th of January 1909 at 9 a.m. It took place at Pentonville Prison, and the executioner was Henry Pierpoint, who's the uncle, I was about to say father then, he was the uncle of Albert Pierpoint, our favourite executioner. Good old Albert. Or was he the father? I can't remember. Doesn't matter, does it? Doesn't matter. Right, let's do the questions. The ones that hopefully I haven't ballsed up yet. Right. Question number 1. What city were Jack and Kathleen raised in? What city in India were Jack and Kathleen raised in? Answer was Calcutta. Question 2. What type of epilepsy did Jack suffer from? I've just literally given you the answer. It was petit mal seizures. On my website, if you go into the blog, I've put in some videos of petit mal seizures. So obviously everyone's used to the idea of kind of grand mal seizures, which is the ones with a very violent, uncontrollable convulsions of the whole muscular system of the body. Right, petit mal is entirely different. So I've posted a little video on there. It's mostly petit mal within children, because with many people, petit mal kind of, it's there in childhood and then it kind of disappears. But I've put it on there, and it's really interesting to look at. You can see kids, they're not in any distress, but it looks as if someone has put a shield, like a screen, in front of their eyes, and they can see something entirely different, and they're in their own little world. So they don't look distressed at all, but it's, they're clear, they're like little statues. But obviously this is a video of typical petit mal seizures, not atypical, which are very different. I couldn't find any of atypical. There was a video on there of a lady discussing her atypical seizures, but there's there doesn't seem to be any footage of atypicals. Question 3. What did Jack's father do as a job? He was a sergeant major in the army. Question 4. What is at 84 Shaftesbury Avenue today? I say today, don't forget we're just post-lockdown, so whether it's going to still be there, we don't know. But that is the Ollie. It could be Ollie, it could be Olay. It's a Korean barbecue restaurant. It's very good. It's very nice. The food is very tasty. Question 5. What was Jack holding when Stella found him under his sister's bed? It was a cutthroat razor. Question 6. Which tube station was Jack the substation attendant for? Hard one, this one. Did you hear it? It was Ravenscourt Park Tube. That's over in West London. South West London. Question 7. How much money was held at Cartmell and Schlitt's bank? It's had good not to give this one away. In total, they said it was around £2,000, which is the equivalent of £250,000 today. Question 8. What were Jack's 3 favourite hobbies and interests? They were engineering, Indian poetry, and shooting paper targets at the shooting range. Apparently he was quite good. It's quite a good shot. He'd got a couple of targets in his house. Police used this as evidence to say, oh, look, he's an expert marksman, blah, 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 blah. But he wasn't. It's like he was keen on precision. The guy who ran the rifle range said, he was a good bloke. He rarely came in with friends, but he was one of the people who'd come in there, and he was very good and meticulous. He kept the gun in a good working order, and he wasn't a dick about it. He would follow the rules and the regulations. So that's why he liked him, trusted him. I've got a whole section. I had a whole section in here about him going and buying the gun, and he went through the whole process. The gun he was using was legal. Didn't steal it. Legal gun. He bought a license for it that day. Joe signed it properly with his name and his address. So he got the police license for it because he hadn't got a criminal record. So he could have a police license and a something else as well. Oh, I can't remember. But it was all legal and fine, and everything was above board. He bought some shots. He did some practice shots. So it was all fine. We're not too sure where he got the knife from. Some people say he got it from the King's Rifles shooting range. Some say he doesn't. An odd thing that's not included in here is on the knife he filed off the maker's mark. We're not too sure why he did that. Some people did that, because the knife was definitely German, and people had a tendency to file off the any foreign maker's marks. But we don't know why he did that. Maybe he didn't do that. Maybe someone else did that. Maybe it was a second-hand knife. We don't know. Not much is known about that. Question 10. Before Jack and Kathleen came to London from India, Where did they live? Answer was Glasgow. Glasgow! So that's that. That's that done. Good. Whoa, that was a hard one. That was a difficult one to write because obviously, all the evidence says he did it, and he did do it. And you look, the files will say he did it, and in the press they say he did it. And I almost wasn't going to do this. I knew about this case, but I knew the side that we'd been told, and I was like, oh. Do I really want to do this one? A guy who blames it on sunstroke and malaria, and I was like, oh, this is bollocks. But actually, when I opened up the file and looked at it, I was like, oh, wow, there's so much more going on here. So did it happen this way? We don't know. We will never know. We know, there's no physical... We've only got what people say they saw. They all said, at the time of the attack, his eyes looked weird. They were a little bit fluttery. He didn't seem to say anything. All the evidence points to the fact that it was a petit mal seizure, but was it? We don't know. Was he faking it? Unlikely. It seemed odd that someone so calm and meek and polite and, that was in that kind of... that would suddenly just snap and become a violent criminal. But, or... It's interesting, something I was thinking when I was doing this, his sister had a brain tumour, his mum had brain fever, his dad died of malaria, but there was something else going on as well. They all had hereditary epilepsy, so I'm wondering whether he had some kind of brain tumour as well. There's recent cases of people committing crimes who had, a tumour on a specific part of their brain, which increases their testosterone and things like that, but... And how people have changed. You take out the tumour in that part of the brain, and suddenly they're fine, and they're entirely different people. So maybe he had a tumour. Maybe the epilepsy was in a certain part of his brain. We don't know. And now he's executed, and they didn't do an autopsy. Well, they did an autopsy to check that he died the way that he's meant to have done, according to being hung. But that's it. So we will never know. So this is kind of my angle of the story. It could be 100% right. It could be 100% wrong. We don't know. But obviously I'm writing Jack's story for him. Who knows? Anyway, that's me done. I've still got a cake. I've got co-op based Belgian bun. Ooh, lovely. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to go off and do my laundry in a bit. Very exciting. God, Mike, your life is just so amazing. Right, hope your life is amazing. Don't forget, stay safe, keep your distance. The longer we do this, the better we do this, the more that we can get rid of this virus, and we can all go back to living a normal life. And Murder My Warts can start again. That'd be nice. I could earn some money. Right. Have yourselves a good day. Drink tea. Apparently tea is the cure. It's not, but we can imagine it is. Anyway, have a good day. Be good. Stay safe. Bye.